All right, guys, so this is the blueprint on how to achieve near native accent and elite reading ability simultaneously. So, for most people, most people might be satisfied with just having, near native conversation. So, basically, like obtaining the ability to be able to navigate the colloquial language and spoken language through like a native. But if you're someone that really wants to actually master some of the literature in the language, which means obtain a really high literary level of the language, then this is also how to do that simultaneously. Because a lot of people that have really good accents in the language, like I'm talking like native level accent, usually they suck at reading, right? Like they don't know how to read. Like their vocabulary is so low, right? And usually people that have an amazing literary knowledge of the language, like they're able to know, they know a ton of vocabulary, they know a ton of words, they usually don't have good accents. Like they usually like their accent sucks. It's like it doesn't even match native. Like they have a thick accent. So how do we get the best of both worlds? How do we appear native in conversation with an accent or phrasing, and also at the same time obtain a very high literary level of the language in terms of reading? How do we have both of these? And this is the blueprint, the perfect blueprint that you can use for any language, right? That's gonna get you there. Now I learned Japanese and French already, so and I have experience like with these different languages, and I know like how to apply this blueprint for other languages too. So basically it's gonna be divided into like three stages. So stage one is the colloquial stage. Now here's the thing, guys. If you want a perfect accent in a language, you're going to have to avoid reading immersion for a very long time. Or at least not that long actually, because mastering slice of life content is actually going to be relatively quick, even if you only rely on ears. But if you want a native accent, right? If you do only listening immersion in the beginning, the reason why I specifically say only listening immersion is because you're still going to do reading with Anki. Like you're still going to do Anki and make your 10 words a day, so you're going to learn the readings of the words through Anki, but you're going to make all your immersion listening. Because usually, if you know how to hear a word, it's going to be very easy to learn how to read a word. But the same does not work in reverse. Like if you know how to read a word, you're most likely not going to, it's going to be a little bit harder to listen for the word, right? But since we're only focusing on the colloquial stage, this stage right here is just only meant to reach mastery of the colloquial language, right? So this is basically listening. So this stage is pretty much simple. You only consume content that's slice of life or, casual language. So for example, what this will look like for Japanese would be like, okay, you only consume slice of life anime, slice of life dramas, and YouTube TV and YouTube, Japanese YouTube, right, where people are just like casually talking, right? Don't try to pick academic subjects. Don't try to like listen to someone who speaks like too smart, like too highly. Like just find very casual live streams, that are actually going to mimic everyday language, right? Because you want to keep the input as easy as possible in order for you to rapidly acquire vocabulary. Because for you to master colloquial language, you would roughly need to know like probably 10,000 words, which is still significant, but it's not that hard to do because the words repeat so often, right? Especially when you're only dealing with slice of life domain, there's only so many words you have to learn, before you just end up knowing all of them. And especially these words are going to be very high frequency and they're going to repeat very often, so your brain will be able to pick it up naturally, even if you only rely on your ears, right? So people may think that learning a language through listening is not doable, but this is because they consume content that's too hard, right? Yeah, maybe if you're trying to read a book, it's like trying to listen to a book is like crazy, right? You might as well just read that. But if you only stick to easy content, right? So for French, what I did was I consumed casual live streams from Inoxtag, Colloquial, Squeezy, right? You want to consume casual YouTube content, right? YouTube content where they're not talking about anything so sophisticated. They're not doing, like, you're not consuming podcasts. You're consuming like gaming live streams where it's like people are just casually talking using very everyday language that's unscripted too. Like the thing with YouTube is that it's unscripted. So that's the good thing. If you just join like live streams of Inoxtag, you see like a ton of unscripted content. So that would be perfect for perfecting your colloquial French, right? And it'll make you sound native in terms of expressions of how people use slang and also like accent and everything. Because especially if you're only doing your ears, if you're only relying on your ears, it's like you'll be able to learn really fast, and have like an almost perfect accent. And basically, the goal of the first stage is to go from 0% comprehension up to 99% comprehension, which is going to be really relatively fast. Like, it doesn't take very long for you to reach 99% comprehension in like colloquial slice of life content, right? But once you reach 99% comprehension in colloquial language, then all you have to do is basically just go to the country, right? For activating the output. So if you want to be able to speak the language, then you're ready to. You're basically prepared to speak the language now. So now all you have to do is you have to go to the country and continue to still immerse in the colloquial content, because you still have to like spend time understanding. You still have to spend time watching content. You understand everything for your brain to internalize and automate the process, right? So it's not like you reach 99% comprehension and you're done. It's like, no, you still have to like hover here for a little while. You still have to keep immersing in the same content, understanding everything for a while before your brain like fully internalizes the patterns towards like deeply in your subconscious, so that when you go out to the country and speak to people, it's just gonna come out automatically like this, right? So there's still like a little bit of like soaking period once you reach 99% comprehension. But at that point, you're pretty much ready to go to the country and speak. Now, so this is for colloquial stage, right? So this is for like, and this is how it is. Like, don't even try going into literary works if you haven't even mastered the colloquial yet. But the colloquial stage is probably gonna be like the fastest stage. So yeah, you can actually learn a lot of languages to a colloquial level without necessarily reading, because it's like there's only so many words they use in slice life content. So yeah, guys. So this will be stage 1. Then stage 2 is basically developing reading, developing your vocabulary. Now for this, it's better to just rely on reading more. So basically, it's gonna be a combination of intense reading of literature and also doing passive immersion with listening. So the reason why this is really good, now here's the thing. So with this stage, even if you mastered colloquial content, when you read your first book, there's gonna be a ton of words you don't know. There's gonna be a ton of words that you're probably not gonna know. And at the beginning, the best way to just get through this is to just like brute force it, just memorize every single word in your first book. And it's gonna feel like it's gonna take forever. Like especially if you do 10 cards a day, it's gonna feel like it's gonna take months to get through your first book. But when you get to your first book, the books after that are gonna be a lot easier. But in the meantime, while you're memorizing every single unknown word in like a certain light novel or book, right? You can still spend the rest of your time doing passive immersion in content that matches your book. So before, in the colloquial stage, you were only consuming one type of content. You were only consuming slice life content. Now in the second stage, you're consuming 2 types of content. You're doing intensive immersion through literary works. So if you're learning Japanese, this will be, you'll be reading light novels. For French, you'll be reading like, classical literature in French. And then you would have your listening to complement with that. So you do like watching. So you basically do like passive free flow immersion of listening for like, but this content is going to be like a bridge between the colloquial and the literary language. Because the problem is sometimes, guys, when you go into literary language, the language is so high, right, in terms of like vocabulary, that there's a huge gap in vocabulary and grammar between literary language and spoken language. So that's why you need to have content that falls right in between that. And for Japanese, it's anime, right? So for example, if you're to like basically get like a slice of life, if you get like a fantasy light novel. So for example, if you were to start with Konosuba, so let's say Konosuba was like your very first light novel, this very first book you decide to tackle in Japanese, what you can do is, as you're memorizing every single word you don't know in a light novel, you can spend the rest of your passive immersion time consuming content that's related to this. So you watch easy to intermediate fantasy anime, right? And what that's going to do is it's going to allow you to passively, through exposure alone, acquire a lot of words that are going to be used in this, and also reinforce the words that are going to be used in here. Because like if you memorize every single word in here, a lot of these words will appear in anime, right? It's not like these are separate. especially with anime, you can choose the difficulty of anime very easily. Like, you can just, if you decide to consume intermediate anime, they're going to use some light novel expressions. They're going to use some literary expressions. They're going to use some, fantasy words. So you can actually use basically fantasy, like, intermediate fantasy anime as like a passive immersion tool to rapidly learn all the light novel words that are going to be used in here. So that's why this combination is effective, because you're doing intensive reading. So you're basically getting used to reading, you're getting used to literature, but you're consuming media that's just below this, right? Which would be like basically intermediate anime. And then you'll be able to rapidly fill in the gaps, right? And it's still comprehensible because you're watching something and it's like a show. It's very comprehensible, because the problem with books is that if you want to actually do extensive reading for books, you have to have a ton of vocabulary. Like, you have to understand 95% of the language for it to be even comprehensible. And that's just because there's only words. Like, you open the book, it's just a bunch of words. There's no way you're going to be able to efficiently acquire vocabulary subconsciously by just reading more, especially if the comprehension is below 90%. So that's why we use TV shows, but harder TV shows in slice of life, to allow you to learn the harder words, but in a comprehensible setting, right? And diverging from slice of life anime and going into harder intermediate types anime, or like intermediate type of watching material, is going to allow you to bridge the gap between colloquial language and literary language very fast, right? Now, what I plan to do with Arabic is, after I master, like, let's say slice of life Egyptian Arabic TV shows, and I decide to pick up, classical Arabic. So I basically pick up, like, an easier classical Arabic version of like fiction. When I open the book, it's gonna be like freaking crazy. Like I'm not gonna know like anything, Like, I'm not gonna understand anything. There's gonna be so many words I don't know. Like, the gap between the Egyptian dialect and classical Arabic is like huge, right? So obviously I'm not gonna be able to just like passively read the Quran. Like, of course, it's just gonna be like non-doable, right? But what I can do is I can open the Quran in classical Arabic, and I can just slowly, just every day, memorize 10 words a day. Boom, 10 words a day. So I just open the Quran and I read the Quran until I find 10 new words. And once I find the 10 new words, I'm done reading. And I go over to my listening content. Now, what type of content do you guys think is good for bridging the gap between colloquial Arabic and classical Arabic? Because in Arabic, it actually exists. Actually, I actually looked this up, and I was like, it seems like classical, if you watch historical dramas, so this means that dramas that take place in like ancient Egypt, or like ancient classical drama, are basically like historical dramas that are taken in like a little bit more that are not modern at all, right? Will use MSA. They'll use like modern standard Arabic. They use some formal vocabulary, and a lot of the words that are going to be used in a historical drama are going to overlap with classical Arabic in the Quran. So you'll be learning all these words in the Quran, and some of these words in the Quran will overlap with historical dramas, especially if it's about like if it's about a drama about like the life of the Prophet, or like about something historical. A lot of the vocab in classical Arabic is gonna overlap with historical dramas. So you'll be able to consume classical Arabic vocabulary, sort of, right, in a very comprehensible setting in the context of historical dramas. And the reason why this is very effective is because when you're watching a bunch of historical dramas, it's very comprehensible. Why? Because it's a TV show. It's like the visuals are there, the sounds, it's so comprehensible. It's because it's a TV show. So you'll be able to just rapidly absorb classical Arabic vocabulary like this without thinking, right? And then you basically open your Quran every day and memorize 10 words a day. And you'll be able to slowly, over time, increase the comprehension of the Quran up to 95%, right? And then if for Japanese, if you consume enough fantasy anime, like intermediate fantasy anime, eventually you'll be able to consume a fantasy light novel like this, and you'll be able to understand 95%. Now that's the goal of stage 2. So stage 1 was colloquial, stage 2 was mass vocab expansion. And stage 2 was basically just a bridge for you to get up to stage 3, which is extensive reading. So here's the thing. The reason why I do not recommend you guys don't ever do this, guys, because I made this mistake. Don't ever extensively read a book unless you understand 95%. because I did this problem too. I was basically immersing in a light novel. Like I would spend like literally 5 hours immersing and reading a light novel that I would only understand 70 to 80%. This was a huge mistake. And this is actually part of the reason why like I didn't get as good, as fast. Was because I thought that light novels had this super magical power that was going to increase my vocabulary, but none of it is useless. It's all of it's useless because it's not comprehensible. See, I would have gotten better results if I consumed easier anime that was just above my level. So if I watched an anime that was at my level where I understood 95%, I would have been able to learn the 5% of unknown words through the anime. And that would have been more comprehensible. I would have been able to acquire more words. But no, I was like, I want to get good. So like I decided to like force myself to read a book all day, freaking 5 hours, 6 hours of something I only understand like 70, 80%. So that's why I have the stage 2 here. The stage 2 is just to get your reading ability up to a point where you understand 95%. Because guess what? Once you understand 95% of a novel, whether it be like a Japanese light novel or, in French, it'll be classical literature. So if you can understand like 95% of this book or 95% of like classical Arabic, then stage 3 is the extensive reading phase. So now you don't need to do any more listening. You can just basically extensively read, right? And this is basically just this stage is going to be relatively quick because you're filling in the gap from 95% comprehension to 99% comprehension. So, now that you understand light novels at like 95% comprehension, you'll be able to basically read all day and rapidly improve your vocabulary and very quickly fill the gap between 95% comprehension and 99% comprehension, right? So this is the optimal blueprint because if you do not understand a novel at 95% comprehension, it's pretty much not good to force yourself to keep reading the novel because you hardly understand it. It's incomprehensible input. Like I underestimated the power of comprehensible input. So forcing myself to read a novel I only understood like 80%, would it be less effective than me watching an anime that I understand 95%? Because at least if I watch an anime that's like, 95% or watch a show that's 95%, guess what? I could automatically, passively, through osmosis, without thinking, through exposure, I could acquire the extra 5% vocabulary that I don't know. Like easily. It'll be like this. It'll be so easy because it's comprehensible. It'll be in context. Like I'm more likely to acquire a lot of the words. So that's the thing you guys have to think about is going into novels is very demanding, right? Especially if you're going to literary works, right? Especially if you're doing classical Arabic, like what I want to do with Arabic. If you're trying to do French literature, bro, same thing, bro. And same with light novels. Going into higher level literary works is like there's a huge gap between the colloquial language and the literary language, right? And sometimes people that even if you're fluent in the spoken language, you're not necessarily going to be able to understand 95% of the light novels, right? Like if you just came out of understanding slice of life anime at 99%, if you start reading this, there's going to be some words there's going to be a lot of words you don't know, right? So that's the thing, guys. That's why this blueprint is perfect because with stage 1, you're only focusing on colloquial, easy content. Then you get rapid progress like this. Perfect accent, done. Now for stage 2, the goal of stage 2 is to bring your literacy reading comprehension up to 95%. And what we do is we do intensive reading a little bit every day, and we combine it with free flow immersion of content that resonates or at least is similar to the book you're trying to read. So basically, if you're reading Japanese fantasy light novels, make sure you watch intermediate fantasy anime so that the vocabs, the words are going to overlap between the literature you want to master and the anime is going to like overlap with that. So basically the fantasy anime is going to help you understand more of this fantasy light novel. And what I plan to do with Arabic is basically have the historical dramas and the classical Arabic vocabulary in historical dramas overlap with classical Arabic and be able to overlap with the Quran. So that way I'll be learning a lot of classical Arabic vocabulary through osmosis in context of a TV show. Because if I try to learn all the classical Arabic vocabulary in the Quran, I'm hardly gonna learn anything because it's incomprehensible. It's the same experience I experienced when I was reading like Japanese like light novels and trying to grind through it. It's like there's no point of freaking grinding through a book, bro, because it's incomprehensible. The only time you should be doing extensive reading, and I mean like reading for more than 3 hours, is only when you achieve 95% comprehension. Because once you achieve 95% comprehension, then you can go to stage 3 for extensive reading, where you can just read for hours on end. Because you'll be able to read a book, and if you understand 95% of it, the extra 5% is so easy to fill in. It's so easy to dun, 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 dun. It's gonna be effortless, right? So stage 2 is just to get you to stage 3 where you can extensively read, right? And by that point, the gap between 95% comprehension and 99% comprehension, you're gonna be able to fill in the gap super quickly, right? So yeah, guys, this is probably the optimal way to go about it, right? So so those are the stages, guys. So stage 1, colloquial content, you only consume slice of life content. Stage 2, start doing intensive reading, doing some Anki a day, like 10 cards a day, and then immerse in a TV show that is similar to what you're reading. And then stage 3 is extensive reading, where you basically just like end up extensively reading a lot of books in the language. And at that point, you can basically read for like 4 hours, 5 hours, and you won't have mental fatigue because you're understanding literally 95% of it. So you're gonna be able to fill in the extra 5% you don't know very quickly. And at that point, like, you'll be able to reach like a perfect accent, because of stage 1, and also simultaneously develop high literacy, but in a very effective way that's going to allow you to bridge the gap between colloquial language and literacy language rapidly, right? So that's what I plan to do and you can apply it to any language, right? So for French, it'll be stage 1, I consume slice of life TV shows and French live streams. Done. Once I achieve 99% comprehension in those, master that completely. Okay, now it's time for me to like slowly chip away at books, right? Until I achieve 95%. And then once I achieve 95% comprehension in this, then stage 3, extensive reading. You guys get it? That's how you do it, guys. Just do this in any language. This is the perfect blueprint. This blueprint is actually amazing. And I'm gonna try to test it out when I do eventually learn Arabic. I'm probably not gonna learn Arabic until like probably after I go to Japan, because I'm gonna go to Japan this summer. So like I would like to start Arabic after I go to Japan. So yeah, guys. But I think this blueprint is really well thought out, and it really does allow you to master not only the colloquial language but also the written language simultaneously without it interfering with each other.